Good evening, folks. This is your ticker guy coming at you from Niceville. Well, I want to talk to you about Keith Olbermann and his little rant about Rick Santelli. Let's go ahead and play the clip, and then I will respond.
Time for Countdown's number 2 story, tonight's worst persons in the world. The Bronze tonight, with my apologies to my corporate cousins, who I have uniformly defended here from all attacks, to Rick Santelli of CNBC. He attacked the stimulus and mortgage rescue plans from the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange yesterday on the air, the highlights of which were as follows.
Promoting bad behavior. How about this, President and new administration? Why don't you put up a website to have people vote on the internet as a referendum to see if we really want to subsidize the losers' mortgages?
When a few of the traders on the floor then cheered, Santelli turned to address them.
This is America. How many of you people want to pay for your neighbor's mortgage that has an extra bathroom and can't pay their bills? Raise their hand. How about we all? President Obama, are you listening?
I don't know, Mr. Santelli, but I'm wondering if it occurred to him that his arguments against the government promoting bad behavior and subsidizing the losers and paying for their neighbors' mortgages, that those comments carried to their logical extreme are the best arguments for not bailing out the bad banks and not bailing out bonus-crazy Wall Street guys and not bailing out any of those mercantile traders who happen to be standing behind him. Geez Louise, man, come back and join us here in the real world. Business people in this country right now are viewed like actors were after Booth shot Lincoln. While we try to fix what you all did to this country, just sit down and hush up.
Mr. Olbermann, you ought to take your own advice. First, Mr. Santelli has been one of the few members of the media who has steadfastly been opposed to all bailouts. His position from the beginning of this crisis was that those people who committed fraud, lied about their incomes, and made inappropriate loans should at best be dealt with in bankruptcy and at worst should be prosecuted. That happens to be my position as well, sir, and I have spent tens of thousands of dollars of my own money trying to advance that policy position within our government. To no avail. You see, it's very convenient to go ahead and try to bail out people that haven't been able to act in a responsible fashion, but where I think that the question becomes one of outrage is when we not only bail out those people who did irresponsible things, but when we bail out people who committed felonies. And let's not kid ourselves. Lying on a mortgage application is a federal offense. It's a very serious crime. But that doesn't seem to bother people like you, Mr. Olbermann, who are more than happy to commit taxpayer money, the money of people who work hard for it, like those traders on the floor of the Chicago Merc, in order to bail out those people who are criminals. And let's not kid ourselves. That is what's going on. That's what's been going on. Let's go ahead and ask Sheila Bair. You see, there are people who said in my previous video that I was overstating my case, that in fact those people wouldn't get refinanced. That's not true. Here is a transcript from an interview Ms. Bair had on the 19th with NPR. Question: at this point, there is still some stiff resistance mounting from Republicans in the House. Should people who overstated their income or assets to obtain their original mortgage be eligible for taxpayer-funded assistance? Ms. Bair's answer: I think it's just simply impractical to try to do a forensic analysis of each and every one of these delinquent loans that may have been originated 2 or 3 years back to find out whether income has been appropriately stated at that time. How much more clear does it need to be, Mr. Olbermann? How much more clear does it need to be, Americans? If your neighbor lied about their income, said they made $150,000 to qualify for that $450,000 mortgage, and they really hand out shopping carts at Walmart, you're going to pay their bill. Even though that act is not just a petty little thing, it happens to be a federal offense. It gets better. Ms. Bair was then asked as a follow-up, should the plan provide money to banks who knowingly wrote bad mortgages? Ms. Bair's answer: there are clearly a lot of loans that should not have been made, she says, adding that underwriting standards became too lax, and unfortunately it was a widespread practice. Let me translate that one into English. The banks were well aware that you were probably making $8 an hour at Walmart because a lot of these people said, in fact, they worked at Walmart. But they said they made $150,000 a year. And instead of asking to see something like, say, for example, a pay stub or a tax return, they just took your word for it. A little bit of investigation, a little bit of this thing called underwriting that is supposed to go on when you make loans would have stopped this dead in the tracks. But in fact, the banks didn't do that, and neither did any of these other lenders. And then these loans were packaged up into securities where the lies were promulgated out to investors. investors who have now lost hundreds of billions of dollars as a result of fraud that all began at the application table. Mr. Olbermann and the rest of you that are watching this video, please be aware that I have no problem with helping out Americans who are truly in over their head through no fault of their own. But let's take the money to help those people from those who acted badly. Let's go after the bankers who have houses in the Hamptons and yachts and got them in no small part by granting these fraudulent mortgages and foreclose on their houses. Let's claw back their property and disgorge the ill-gotten gains of their activities. Let's take those people's homes who got them through false and fraudulent pretense, foreclose on them, seize all of their personal assets, auction them off, and use the proceeds in order to pay back the losses of some of these people who have been screwed. Instead of having the taxpayer front up hundreds of billions of dollars to take care of the sins of these folks, all of whom have committed criminal offenses, I think we ought to go get the money from the people who stole it. But no, you see, that requires that we actually admit that there were a bunch of people out there who exploited other Americans, that there were people that did criminal and illegal and evil things, that this wasn't an accident. And it requires that we stop trying to suckle off the public teat for those people who did those evil things. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Olbermann, that 30% of the people in this country have no mortgage on their home whatsoever. 92% of the people who have mortgages are paying them. So because 8% of this country did something awful and in fact unlawful, you propose to tax the rest of us in order to pay for somebody's crime. Mr. Olbermann, that's ethically, morally, and journalistically bankrupt, especially when you suggest that Rick Santelli, one of the few people on CNBC who has been steadfastly against bailouts and has been in favor of bankruptcy and clawbacks, he's in fact supporting some kind of class warfare against those people who are less fortunate. Oh, sure, there are a number of people who have lost their jobs who took out prudent, reasonable loans and are now in trouble. If we can help them, we should. But that money should come from the people who did the bad things, not from those of us who had no part in this. And oh, by the way, those jobs that were lost, that led to this problem, would not have been lost but for those unlawful and evil actions. So why don't we look where the problem really resides and go after them? You know, we don't overlook the crack house on the corner because if we were to send in the police, the shooting would start and that would drop property values. No, we legitimately recognize that this is the operation of a continuing criminal enterprise and it needs to be closed down. When are you, Mr. Olbermann, along with the rest of the mainstream media, going to come to realize that none of this was an accident, none of this happened in a vacuum, and that it is not the intent of people like Mr. Santelli to excuse the bankers and give them bailouts? Quite to the contrary. Mr. Santelli has tapped into a populist sentiment that all of these bailouts shouldn't have happened. That in the best case, these people should go see a bankruptcy judge to resolve their problems, and in the worst, they should see a judge and a jury of their peers on their way to federal prison. Have a good evening, sir.